This week, the runtime application self-protection security market is showing some growth according to some. Cloud-based access provider Duo Security unveils new single sign-on for SaaS-based solutions. AlienVault Research has found that it is a moral responsibility to share threat intelligence data. Callus beefs up its cloud security tool for security consultants. Oracle bought someone, and a whole bunch of other vendors push their tools into the cloud. Privileged identity management is the topic for this week's show. We'll start with the basics about basically defining the terms and asking the ever important question, what's the problem we're trying to solve? All that and more on this week of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is a Security Weekly production. IT Pro TV, an easy, entertaining approach to online IT training. IT Pro TV offers 1,000 hours of up-to-date, high-quality video training content. Course topics include certified cloud security professional, ethical hacking, cryptography, and VMware. You can stream their courses live or on demand to your mobile device, all for one low monthly subscription price and cancel at any time. Visit itpro.tv/enterprise security to upgrade your brain with the most popular IT certifications. Use the code ES30 for a free 7-day trial and save 30% off for life. Welcome, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. I'm your host, Paul Lasadorian, broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. On the lines via Skype is not John Strand, because he, like much of the other, well, most of 95% of the Security Weekly crew, is at DerbyCon. But Michael Santar-Cangelo, broadcasting from the beach, is here with us. Welcome, Michael.
Hey, man, it's always good to be with you.
Yes, always nice to, I like how we flip back and forth between Enterprise and Startup and Security Weekly. It's just so much fun. I can't complain about my job. I really can't. If I do, no one should listen, ever. So let's see. We've got some interesting stories this week to talk about. The runtime application self-protection, or RASP, is predicted to grow at a CAGR of 43.94%. And that's pretty high, correct? When we talk about the CAGR thing, we started the show, and now I'm starting to use the acronyms of CAGR and all this other stuff. Just crazy, Michael.
I feel very, you're very, yeah, man, you're impressive. Yeah, you know what I'm trying to figure out though is what its starting levels are, because it's an impressive percentage unless you're starting from a really low number.
I'm not quite sure of the adoption for RASP. I know that it's been around for a little while, like 5 or 6 years when analysts first started talking about it, and everyone really poo-pooed it in the beginning. There are 2 vendors that emerged, Previty, Contrast Security. To my knowledge, there's no free trials that they're offering. So it tells me that they're kind of still hand selling it, which means its adoption rate is probably not as great as some other technologies. However, I personally believe the technology is great. Everything that I've spoken with both companies, actually, and probably research other ones in this space, and it's still, even though it's got 5 or 6 years, right, it's still considered like this newer technology. So it's not surprising me that the growth rate that it's taken. I think if you're in a decision where you got to choose like WAF or RASP, like definitely more effort in RASP for sure.
Well, and so yeah, and it's interesting. This would be fun to talk about on a startup show too. So I was actually just refreshing myself on CAGR here real fast. What that's going to do too is it's going to give us an idea of the value of the investment. That matters to me if I'm in an enterprise, because if I'm looking at, do I do RASP, do I do WAF, do I do any of these types of things, right? We're going to talk later on identity management, but when you start asking some of these questions, and you want to be in a position in the enterprise where you're not putting your own reputation at stake and you're using the limited funds that you have into a good place. So from that perspective, I would say a 43% growth over a 4-year period is actually good. I mean, at
Yeah.
least it shows that that's likely, right? So I'm reading this as that's likely to attract investment, which means it's likely to stay. Plus, you called out the names, but let's not forget too that HP is in there, and
Yes,
so
you're absolutely
you've got
correct.
you got money.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, and you're right. There is a big player in that market as well. I'm glad you reminded me of that. And I think for me, we may have said this on the show before, but I want to reiterate that I think some of the slower adoption we've seen in Rasp is that you have to involve the developers, or at least,
yeah,
I mean, it's more tied to what the developers are doing than is something like a WAF. I mean, and I think that's some of the downfalls of WAF, because I think the network teams are like, and security teams are like, yeah, we need to protect our web applications. So we can just stick a web application firewall in front of it, and I can configure it and go to the races. And they're not really talking to the developers. But with Rasp, since it has to sit inside the application server, they have to approach, I think, some of those teams more so than you would with a WAF. And I mean, that's a generalization, but I think as a general rule, that's the shift that we're seeing in these two technologies. And as you speak about all the time, Michael, it's hard to work with other groups in your organization. So, there might, in larger organizations, there's a security team, there's a team that handles the infrastructure, there's a team that handles the application or the, like platform, right? That's like separate kind of things. And then there's a team that manages development. So you have to interact with all those teams to get this technology deployed. So I think we'll get there. I think
no, I think you put your finger on it. I'll point out something else interesting. Correct me if you think this analogy is wrong, but we've been talking for years about build-in versus bolt-on, and so Rasp is build-in.
yeah, it's more
Build-in.
built in than
Okay,
yeah.
yeah, and so as a result, I think you nailed it perfectly. That means I not only have to be able to explain the technology and the value of it and whether it's going to survive or not.
Yeah.
Because imagine, so this is where now the CAGR comes in more importantly, because imagine then I go to somebody in the development team and say, hey guys, we want to make some changes. We're going to fund it. We want to make some changes. The developers are going to look at it and say, okay, what's the impact to me? How long is that going to take? And is this thing going to be around in 2 years? Because if it's not, I'm not going to do it. So, all right, this has a little bit more importance to it than we looked at. Well, than I originally thought, at least.
Dual Security has unveiled some new single sign-on capabilities that incorporate, and I was actually surprised they didn't have this already, they're incorporating cloud-based solutions. I think this is important. I think, and I want this to kind of be a theme for the news this week, Michael, is we keep talking about cloud adoption on all of our shows. And for me, I think it's a dead issue. I don't even really want to talk about it anymore because I think we're going there. It's happening.
Oh, yeah.
I have an interesting thought. I'm not sure if it fits on this show or startup, maybe both. But I think that you're going to have to go to cloud. You're going to use SaaS solutions. If you're not planning on using them, you're using them already, and your users just aren't telling you. Yep. So solutions like this, and Duo's on my list of good companies. I mean, John and I think have the list of good companies. I don't want to say bad companies, but ones that we're kind of struggling with the value of their solution, to put it politically correct. And I'm not saying that viewpoint doesn't change, right? Like companies can move between our different viewpoints as we learn and we grow, and the companies grow as well.
And the context shifts, right? Context.
Yeah.
Value is going to be driven heavily by context.
Exactly. Duo is one of those companies that just always comes up in a positive light for me when I talk to people, when I research them, and when I have friends that work there. So, and it's Doug Song that actually is the CEO and founder of Duo Security, which is pretty cool. So anyway, I think it's kind of a no-brainer, right? I mean, if you're a provider of single sign-on, you now have to incorporate cloud-based solutions. There's no getting around it.
No, in fact, what I think is interesting about it too is this is a preview to the conversation we're going to have on identity management. I think one of the reasons that identity management is so much more in the spotlight again, right? It's like the completion of a site is largely because of the cloud, and people looking at this saying, how on earth are we ever going to do this? So yes, so when you see a vendor doing something like that, I think it's absolutely fantastic. And if you're kidding yourself that you're not going to go to the cloud, Well, good luck with that.
Yep. I just think it's right now. I think for me, we've crossed into that threshold where it's just how you deploy technology today. There's no. I mean, we're going to see some hybrid. And what's interesting, so as we get in some of the other stories, Michael, to jump around a little bit,
Yeah.
I talk about EIQ and Skybox and Darktrace, and really there were three announcements there in a row. I mean, Callus too. Callus has always been a big cloud company, but and Oracle buys a cloud. So the whole thing for me is, as we have this cloud adoption, one of the things I was thinking of is, like, where does your savings come in? And think about that. And you can think about that from a vendor perspective, which I think is more of a conversation for Startup Security Weekly. In this show, we focus on the enterprise solution and the defenders of the world. So when you think about how you're going to deploy a solution, I've gone down some paths, Michael, that I'm like, is that really going to be cost effective? And then what are the benefits? So for example, I mean, there's tons of examples of these solutions in the cloud, right? So you've identified this solution and the goals for that solution and the requirements, and you've done some projections as to what it's going to do and how big it's going to grow, right? I mean, let's just say it's an analysis tool of some kind. Now, you have to store some data. There's some compute cycles associated with that, and there's some data in. Data in is usually free, but data out costs money. So if you're going to go buy this solution in the cloud, if you're a really large environment, you're going to be writing a pretty big check to either the vendor directly or the cloud provider like Amazon or Microsoft, or now Google's thrown its hat in the ring as well. Is it more cost effective to do that on premise, where there is a cost for bandwidth and compute and storage, but it's conceivably a lot less, maybe? I want to encourage people to start thinking about it that way as we talk about all these different solutions being offered in the cloud. Are you going to rack up a bill on your cloud provider, right? That's going to be enormous, whereas you could have had it on premise. And then you start thinking the middle road, like, is there a hybrid approach, right? Can I do some of my storage, locally, collection locally, and then do some of the analysis in the cloud? I think that where those lines fall are going to be really interesting in the next 3 to 5 years to see how these different solutions pan out for organizations.
And I think they're going to rapidly change over that time frame too. I mean, if we look at just the cost of data, the accessibility of data. I mean, I was marveling the other day, and this is related to the enterprise side of stuff. I mean, gosh, I'm old enough. I can remember dialing in with modems, right? So
and that was your cost, is maintaining your bank of phone lines and T1s.
Yeah. Well, so yes. And so as we start looking at this now, and we start to consider how these pieces work. I mean, when I first started traveling by RV, right, and I'm now at the beach, but when I was doing RV, if I could get the equivalent of a modem line down, I was really happy. And now with LTE speeds, what did I see they're bursting now? Like 300 down, 400 down?
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, now to your point, that'd be a pretty big bill compared to what I can get with a cable modem or DSL fixed at the house. Well, I think those things come into it. But I think you're right about the cost. I think there's two things to consider. First of which is the level of comfort that we have in the predictions that we make. Mm-hmm. And I think the simplest, bluntest way to put it is I don't see too many people that A, check, and B, are accurate. And that's why we don't tend to check too often. Right. So if you've made a set of assumptions on it, one of the questions you've got to ask yourself is, what's my level of confidence that I've actually figured this out the right way? Yeah. Which I think is why we see people get big bills. I'm looking at more and more cloud providers that give you some ability to limit that. Mm-hmm. And so go ahead and put some limits on it, because what I see is the counter argument is, what's the cost of procurement? What's the time frame to get it spun up, right? And then there's CapEx and OpEx. So if you're going to go buy some big iron and you're going to put that in and you're going to set it up and then you're going to run it, okay, well, who's going to maintain it? Mm-hmm. And then we just got done talking about how the different groups sometimes don't work as well together as we'd like them to. So that needs to factor into your analysis on it. And oh, by the way, is that going to spin up like every now and then 98% of its capacity is completely unused? Yeah. That's maybe not the best use of your dollars. And so I think you're right on the hybrid side. But what I also think is that in the next 3 to 5 years, as everybody tries to be more competitive with Amazon, I think we're going to see the whole space shake out and get cheaper. I wanted to go back to a different point, though, that you started out with. if people have read Crossing the Chasm, the Jeffrey Moore book,
Hmm.
you know, we're there. It's the way we're going to deploy. We're still leading edge. I don't think we've crossed the chasm yet. I think there's still a lot of people probably listening to us right now saying, I hear what you guys are saying, but I'm not ready for that yet.
Mm.
I don't think we've crossed the chasm. I think we're looking down at it right now.
Yeah,
And
I think
there's some of us that have leapt, but some are still trying to figure it out.
I think technology and cost wise, like we really need to take those things into consideration. So technology, I mean, like the ability to deploy applications, and I guess it's usability, right? And that ties into cost. And I would consider those factors. What I have feared, and I fear people are doing, is they're factoring in security to that.
Yeah.
And to me, that's not as much of a factor right now. I think in most cases, like we've said, security is more accessible and easier to a certain extent when you're deploying in the cloud than maintaining on premise. Now, that's not the case 100% of the time. It depends on the organization. And I think that we're going to see some of those hybrid approaches, both for security and availability, perhaps. You're going to see a lot of those decisions into the hybrid go there. So,
Well, no, yeah, and then let's add another complexity to it. So we talked about how old I am and being able to use dial-up modems and such, but now how many devices do we have that access data from what locations? I mean, that was stuff that was unheard of even a decade ago, and now it's commonplace. I think I saw a study someplace said the average employee now has at least two, most have three different ways to access their data at any time of day from any location that they're in. If you want to get that done right, you're pretty much pushing yourself into the cloud. But what I also think is interesting now that we're talking about it is that we have so many stories here of companies that are in the cloud, that are making it easier to be in the cloud, that are providing security in the cloud, that are helping you keep your arms around all that stuff in the cloud. That's great, because if we look at the top reasons people aren't going to the cloud yet, it's security. And I've often said that's a lie. Well, let's be nicer. That's a lie. They're using the word security because they don't know what else to say, and so they go, "Oh, security." But if you ask them, "Okay, what specifically are you concerned about?" "Oh, it's control." Okay, so it's not really security. And I don't mean controls. I mean control. All right,
right.
well,
Yeah.
give that up, and what do you get in return? So,
Yeah.
no, I think you're right. I think it's worth looking at that. And then when we look at these stories, I think it's worth thinking about what that impact is to your organization. And if you're in the enterprise security space, what's the value that you can create? I think cloud gives us this fantastic opportunity to say, we can go faster, we can go cheaper, and I can give you better security at the same time.
And I
That's a
think
great argument.
when we see something like Oracle buying Polara, and we've seen other evidence, we talked about the HP split from software and hardware, and Cisco make a big push into the cloud, although they had some security vulnerabilities in their cloud. You see these big companies really making a commitment to it, and I think this means it becomes more of a commodity and more of just the way we do business, right?
Yeah, I agree.
When I buy solutions from Oracle, when I buy solutions from SAP, they're all making this big push into the cloud. And I think it's solving a lot of the problems. I think it's easing adoption and shortening on these big enterprise software packages. And I shouldn't call them packages, solutions. The infrastructure that you need to maintain locally is overbearing. And the cloud really helps that. We talked about it with Onapsis product manager, Alex Horan, right? There are cloud solutions now, and they're solving the newer customers are coming in and adopting the cloud. And I just think they're going to have a better overall experience with those cloud solutions. And then when Oracle goes and buys Polara, right? Polara lets you manage your cloud environment. I mean, that shows they're going to integrate that and want their customers to experience the solutions they have as a cloud offering. And I think it kind of ends the debate of adoption. I think that's going to be slowly. That's the only option you're going to get, right?
Well, yeah, no, it's gonna go slow. Now, all right, so let's look at it. The same thing, right? And we're gonna look at the companies that are acquiring this. What I think is interesting about Polara in particular is that it was Oracle guys that split off and started Polara. So it's not terribly surprising to me then that Oracle bought them, right? Like that's not a big shock to me. And Polara is interesting. I think I took a briefing with them once. I didn't get deep into them as a particular potential technology. So, I'd love to dig deeper into it and say, what exactly did Oracle do with it? And so let's put on our enterprise security hats. I think these are good conversations, because when we were just talking about, is looking at the growth of a particular space useful in the enterprise? It is, because it helps us understand if we're making a proper investment for ourselves or not. Even if you're looking at some of these more startup oriented companies, take a look at where the founders came from, and take a look at the lineage, and by tracking how the space is operating, you're going to get a sense of where it goes or not. So if you're a Polara customer and they got acquired by somebody huge like Oracle, okay, well then you're still in business. Now, to the other part, what I think is interesting is that if these really big companies that have fantastic economists at their disposal and a lot of other really important models, if they're all pushing aggressively to the cloud and making acquisitions and making their stuff cloud friendly, then yeah, that tells you exactly where the future is going. Now, what's also interesting about it is that second part where you said, so the new customers are coming in, they're coming in on the cloud. Yeah. So one of the things that we've talked about, and maybe not on this program, is that the cloud is this fantastic forcing function. So what we're going to figure out with the customers that come on the cloud, that's going to trickle down into the on-premise equipment anyway, and into the rest of the solutions, which means, and I'm not suggesting it means that you should delay, but what it means is that you're going to start getting those benefits anyway, and when you make the transition, it should be a little bit easier. One more thought on it as I was listening to you talk about it too. Companies for years have had maintenance agreements and software licensing agreements and everything else, so that's not new. Cloud still gives them the ability to do that. Now they've got subscriptions and whatnot, but what I do think is interesting is it used to be, yes, I will sell you X, Y, and Z, but you still have to go buy your own hardware. You've got to have space for it, and you've got to pay for the electricity, and you got to pay for the maintenance and everything else. Well, gosh, if I'm selling you a product and I can take all those startup costs out, which, by the way, I probably didn't get paid for anyway, and now you can come in at a cheaper path and it's easier for you to manage and do, of course I would do it that way.
It's a great segue into EIQ, right? There's basically SIM in the cloud. Now, I can't really speak to the effectiveness of their solutions. However, having had discussions with folks about basically putting your SIM and analytics in the cloud, it's an interesting debate, right? And the fact that a vendor like EIQ is now going there, I find it even more interesting. And I think it's the wave of the future. I think where the uncomfortableness comes from is I'm going to take all of my logs from all my systems and I'm going to store them somewhere else. Like, that's scary. I get that. To me, that's kind of scary, right? I think there's inherent risk in that. Is it more risk versus, storing it locally than in the cloud? I'm not sure. That's going to vary. But once you do that, and I think EIQ is making a smart move, because when you're a larger vendor, like larger than a startup-sized security vendor, you can buy cloud resources basically in bulk and make it more cost-effective and easier for customers to go acquire it. So I think a lot of people are thinking, well, I'm going to have my own cloud. I'm just going to have my own. I'm just going to buy the software and then I'm going to manage my own cloud. But you can't buy in bulk. Maybe you can, but most people can't buy in bulk enough in the cloud to make that cost effective. Whereas a vendor that's servicing thousands of customers, they can do some pre-compute stuff and get their costs down and hopefully pass on some of that savings to you, so that when you implement this solution from end to end, it's just more cost effective for you as the consumer, as the customer.
I'm also going to argue it's better security with some caveats, and here's the caveats. A lot of times when we started looking at people's concerns about moving into the cloud, what we would then see is somebody says, oh, well, I'm built on Amazon, so therefore I'm secure. No, it doesn't work that way. But so what happens then is that as companies like an EIQ and something, they move into the cloud, there's a lot of other companies that are happy to go ask them to kick the tires and ask to show them their different attestations and certifications and dig into it. And every time I talk to these cloud-focused companies, I love how much I learn from them, because they are always in the spotlight. I mean, listen, I think an interesting job for somebody who's in the enterprise today, if a cloud-focused company knocks on your door and says, hey, we love the work you've done in the enterprise, how would you like to be our CISO? Listen, you get to do internal stuff, and by the way, you're on the hot seat every single day, but you're not there with a message of destruction. You're there to be like, absolutely, let me tell you how I'm doing that. And they learn so much, and they keep working through it so fast that we're getting better and better. So yes, I can maybe do it myself, and I'm not going to be as cheap with it, but when you can go to a company that's a security-focused business-to-business company, and you're in the enterprise, there is somebody there that will talk to you about your security concerns, and I guarantee you that should be a good conversation. In fact, if it's not, A, tell me about it because I'd really like to understand that better. And two, that might be a signal for you. That's maybe not a good company. But if you have that good conversation and they can explain to you the choices they're making and the decisions and stuff, I tell you right now, you're going to be envious because you can't do some of that stuff in your environment, but they have to, which means they've thought through that security model better than you can. They've got people dedicated to it, and they're going to keep looking at all those tweaks and changes that you're hopelessly going to keep up with.
Well, and
So
here's,
I think it's better
Skybox
all of it.
Security is a great example of that. That's the other story we have in there.
Look at me
And
setting up the segues.
yeah, you're doing you're like 2 for 2, maybe even 3 for 3. So their VP of products says virtual machines are spun up by systems administrators who don't view the network architecture the same as security engineers. And what their solution claims to do is ensure security policy and tagging is implemented correctly, allowing only authorized access to those new machines. And Skybox has just launched a new, basically, cloud security tool based on VMware NSX and has integration with Amazon Web Services. So that pretty much just backs up everything that we just said.
Yeah, no, so here's the question I have when I look at that then. So that feels a little bit like role-based access. So what's the setup look like on my end? I mean, that's the question I have, that's all. But to your point, if we stay on the theme, yeah. So gosh, what we're finding is there's people who are looking at these challenges and saying, oh, I'm not exactly sure how to make you do that on your own premise, but I figured out how to do it on Amazon. So if that's where you're going, let me hook you up.
Now, it's interesting when we talk about a vendor like Darktrace, they're a heavy analytics tool. I mean, their founders were mathematicians, and they want to collect data, send it to the cloud. Now, they're advertising the benefits of their new cloud solution as no hardware appliance needed, the easy setup, fully scalable, all that happy blah, blah, blah stuff. But my concern is when you take a lot of data and you put it in the cloud, and then you're doing a lot of analytics on it, right? You're racking up storage and you're racking up compute. When you're a really large enterprise and you're looking at deploy something like Darktrace, you know, keep in mind your costs. Like your cost could be really high. I've seen some outrageous price quotes. Like I've heard of outrageous prices. People are like, well, I didn't implement that technology because I'm not talking about Darktrace specifically, but in general with analytics, like the price was really high. And I think that's an issue we need to address. It's kind of where we opened up. But.
If nothing else in the enterprise, it means it's a question that you put into that early part. And if somebody just brushes it aside and says, all right, well, go give me 3 customers that are just like me or that are going to have a similar use pattern to me.
Yeah, like what's their bill like? Right?
Yes, and ask them about it. But then when you're asking them for the bill, the cost, ask them for the value.
Yeah. Yo, and those have to, absolutely. I mean, those have to match up, right?
Yeah. In fact, look, I tentatively entered into all this value work a couple years ago, and I'd say, well, I appreciate sometimes it's a cost, but hopefully the value plays out. Now, let me tell you, I'll be very blunt about it. If you don't get even value within 90 days, I'm really skeptical of using it. And if you can't return 3 to 5 times value within a year, there's other things for you to go focus on that are are higher priority. Period.
Yeah, I mean, it has to save you something, whether that's money, resources, or really increase your detection technologies or protection technologies. If you're going to carry that high price
extending your capabilities, right? So typically, if I talk about it, there's 5 things I look at. You're either going to make me money, you're going to save money, you're going to increase my capabilities, you're going to improve my ability to make decisions, and that's because you're going to give me more accurate, timely information in a context that lets me make a better decision faster. Or you're going to increase my resilience, which could be the resilience of my people, not just my systems. If you're doing any of those things, then there's ways to calculate that out, and it looks good. Let me ask you a question, because this is something I ask every vendor who briefs me, and they're doing anything on the cloud around data and the collection of data. I always say, are you aggregating that data and then using that to look for bigger, broader trends? And I find it's a 50-50. Some say yes, some say no. I think they're missing out. I am fully in favor of companies that aggregate data and look at a broader set of trends and give me better details and information because of it. Yes, I want my stuff obfuscated and everybody else's too. But what's your take on that? Am I looking at that just too myopically, altruistically, morally?
So are you talking about if I'm providing a security solution of any kind in the cloud, and I'm taking like anonymous data from all my customers and I'm using that to provide interesting analytics.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I think companies should do that. I think when you're providing a security solution, your customers are very hesitant to allow you to do that in any capacity.
And that's usually the answer I get when somebody says, no, we don't.
That's
our
just
customers
the
aren't a fan of
trend.
that.
I think it's just a trust thing. Where I've seen that work probably better is when the customer is getting the service or product either for free at a very low cost. They're willing to give up some anonymous data in order to get it at that low cost or free. If you're an enterprise and you're paying $100,000 or more per year for a solution, way less likely to say, oh yeah, and by the way, you can use my anonymous data to do stuff, and it may or may not benefit us. That's a trickier one.
Well, okay. I look, I'm expecting that there's a benefit of some sort, but you've raised an interesting thing. So again, if I'm in the enterprise and I'm asking this question, I might say, well, what if I let you use my data? Do I get a discount on it? Now, by the way, if I flip it around and I'm on the vendor side, I would say, well, maybe, but what I'm going to give you is a better quality result.
Right.
Right. So it's an interesting thing. I'm just kind of curious how you took it.
It's a good segue. You're on a roll with segues, dude, and not the ones that you ride. But the AlienVault Research, and they did a poll. I mean, when they say research, I believe in the article they did a survey, right? Which to me is research is the wrong word to use there. But they found that 76% of security professionals believe that sharing threat intelligence is a moral responsibility. And this kind of ties into your whole question of sharing anonymous data. In threat intelligence, it can be extremely beneficial. However, some people come to me and say, yeah, I can spend a lot of time like looking through everyone else's interesting data. And while it's interesting, it doesn't help me find stuff in my environment. Now, there are exceptions to that rule. I think detecting fraud in financial institutions and the way that people are committing fraud is very applicable. And there are sharing models for that. And I always recommend that in financial institutions, they do that. But when we get into general security threats, that the model starts to fall apart. So I don't know if you want to debate the moral responsibility to do that, but what I find is that it doesn't always transfer, and people spend too much time basically trying to figure out the intelligence, the reports and data, than they would just like going to look for it in their environment.
Yeah. So two things. First of which is, qualitative research is typically surveys, so I'm okay with them calling it research. I had a conversation with somebody earlier today that came out of the Intel community, and they said, what's interesting is we are good at two parts, right? And they're very mechanized. We're good at gathering information, and we're good at disseminating information, but the actual analysis is sometimes pretty Spartan. What I also find interesting is that there's other people that I've looked at that have come from different parts of the experience base that have looked at the exact same thing. And so, a lot of the questions I use in the Straight Talk framework came, frankly, from trying to understand threat intel a little bit better and people not being able to answer the questions. But I met some folks that said, look, it's all about context. So I can understand why people, or at least why you talked about, just give me the intel. I'm not sure where or how that helps. And I keep asking that question repeatedly, but I do want to push on this. And I didn't have enough time to go actually download and see if they gave us the way that they phrased the question. But it's a moral responsibility to share threat intelligence. Now, you know how I do this. First thing I want to know is what exactly does it mean by moral responsibility? And then I want to understand a little bit better than, so when they say threat intel, what do they mean, right? Are they just talking about
exactly.
IOCs or so the whole thing to me is just kind of, it's an interesting thing. And frankly, if I'm in the enterprise, here's my real base question. So what?
Yeah.
How does it help me?
We're running a little short on time, but I just want to mention that Callus has a new cloud offering for security consultants, which, having spent a lot of time in vulnerability management, it can be a pain point for security consultants who use these products that are trying to do multiple assessments and correlate all the data together. There never was, in my opinion, a really good solution for that, and that seems to be, the tide seems to be shifting as companies try and make it easier for folks to use this technology. So that link is in there, as well as VMware NSX capabilities enabling zero trust models. With that, I want to take a short break, come back and talk with Michael about the basics of privileged identity management in the enterprise. Stay tuned.